What I was gonna ask you, Ken, is pimping Ken. By the way, I don't want to, you know, come incorrect. But I was gonna ask you, what do you think about all the animosity that it seems like towards these internet blogs and stuff like that, where they have animosity towards you, in some ways. I mean, what do you say to that?
You have animosity towards me?
Yeah, and probably in how people about certain things that they don't know all the way, the full capacity of, and want, well, this person's this person's that. I mean, how do you combat
Well,
that stuff?
well, basically, I haven't seen, I've seen one chick talk slick on the internet, but I mean, man, where I come from, man, it's pimp say, not hoe say. We don't care about what a bitch say. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but, you know, it's like, a woman will fix a mouth to say anything. Anytime a woman is on the internet disrespecting or talking reckless, you know what I'm saying, she automatically out of pocket.
Okay.
But that ain't even a character of a woman. A woman wouldn't even do nothing like that. She wouldn't even involve herself in men business. You know what I'm saying? She would be somewhere trying to go, and take care of business, you know what I'm saying, take care of family, make sure her kids straight, do something productive. So anytime, somebody, you know what I'm saying, that's on the internet and they talking reckless or they saying something slick, it's basically because they don't have nothing else to do and they probably don't have no order or no structure in their household.
Okay. I was, because usually I'm not talking about like maybe a everyday female that don't know anything about the life. I'm talking about one that's maybe a pimp's left hand, that's that's a madam or something, that's like, well, I've been in a life, I done did this and did certain things. The areas I see ain't lining up to what's what I've done seen as being genuine. That type of person I'm speaking on, really.
Well, I mean, if you look at the history of the game, like in the early 20s and the early 30s, there was a lot of pimps, you know what I'm saying, back in that day, they was on heroin, and they conducted themselves a certain way. The rules was a lot more stricter. Guys were more protective over their women because their women were their supply.
Yeah.
They got high off their supply. So, women were a commodity back then. Then you get into, maybe the 50s and the 60s, it became more fashionable. You begin to see the players ball. You begin to see pimps, in hogs and Cadillacs and, really starting to flaunt, that they was pimps.
Okay.
It's always been pimps, but a lot of times, it was like, they had cat houses and brothels and so on and so forth. It was more low key. So the pimp became flashy around the time you start seeing the movies like Willie Dynamite and Superfly and the Mac and so on and so forth. Brothers started being more flyer.
Yeah.
And then around about the 80s, you know what I'm saying, the pimp became the slash drug dealer. You had a lot of pimps turn drug dealers. A lot of them started slanging and selling drugs and so on and so forth. So you push it up to around 97 when we did Pimps Up, Hoes Down.
Okay.
Now you see the advent of the pimp, that's more, like the businessman. He's social media. He's on Facebook. He's on MySpace. He's putting his face out there more. He's trying to, sell DVDs and movies, and he's trying to be all celebrity-fied and so on and so forth. And then that ran all the way to today. Now, what you got to understand is that in the midst of all this pimping, something else was going on. You know what I'm saying? What was the hoes doing? The hoes was making transitions too. You look at the hoes, back in the 30s and the 40s, those hoes were dedicated bitches. You know what I'm saying? They were down for their pimps. They were getting money.
Yeah.
Then you look around, 75, 76, 80, early 80s, you got hoes that wanted to be hoes. You know what I mean? They was choosing pimps. It was the lifestyle. Everybody wanted to be in that world because they seen it on, Willie Dynamite. They seen it on the Mac. They seen it in the Superfly. They wanted that lifestyle.
Okay.
But then around the 80s, a lot of those women started using drugs. That's why you got a lot of drug babies around here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, drugs affected a whole lot of people in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. But today's modern chick, she don't have to worry about going to the track. See, when you go to the track, you got to either choose a pimp or you got to be a well-respected renegade. You got to be a bitch that's been down for so many years. The pimps they just letting you get your money.
Yeah.
But back when I was coming up, you know what I mean? If you didn't have a pimp, you got your head cut or you got kidnapped or what they call put up under pimp arrest. That was going on back in the 70s and the 80s. Now, today, these women, they can get on Backpage. They don't need no man. They don't need no protection. All they need is a cell phone in the hotel room. And all they need to do is get a Wi-Fi connection, and they can connect to Backpage, and they can solicit tricks from their hotel rooms. They don't need no pimp protection. It ain't about, riding up and down in the Cadillacs and the Benzes, and, it ain't a light show no more. It ain't life camera action no more. So a lot of the women that's speaking today, they wouldn't have spoke 20, 30 years ago because they knew they would have been out of place. They would have got their head cut. They wouldn't have been able to never hit the streets again.
Okay.
So these women that are talking now, they're saying bad things about the game, they don't want to accept the fact that the game is dead. You know what I'm saying? The game does not exist as they know it anymore. If you don't have no track, if you don't have pimps riding up and down the strip with Cadillac, then how can you have the same environment? If a woman is in a hotel room and as soon as she gets mad at her pimp, all she got to do is switch rooms and get another phone from Walmart and get a dummy number and put up some fake pictures, and he never knows she in town. Then how can like we used to say, yeah, man, the bitch got to choose the pimp. You know what I mean? How can you get served for pimping?
Yeah.
So the whole game has changed. Everything is different now. You know what I mean? So you don't have the principles and the characteristics that you had back in the 70s and the 80s. When pimps had certain principles and had certain rules. Those rules are for a reason.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you get hired for hairline, you don't want nobody looking at your game. And then a lot of guys that wasn't using drugs, the sophisticated pimps, they stayed in the big penthouses. They played golf with the white people. They ate at the exclusive restaurants. They were always away from that thing. You always had a group of bosses. That didn't, that was in the pimp game that didn't, hang out with everybody.
Yeah.
It was just them and their hoes or them and their associates. You know what I'm saying? So, the game, as we know it, doesn't even exist anymore. It didn't change tremendously.
Yeah, I know you're saying that, but it's a lot of youngsters out here still want to pursue that. They ain't really trying to hear, what a lot of people that's been more seasoned, are talking about like it's different.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's just like a nigga selling weight or a nigga selling, dimes and nicks. You know what I'm saying? To each his reach.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I might not never sell a cheek. You know what I'm saying? I might just stay on the block and move my nick. You know what I'm saying? Hey, if you want to go and take them chances and you want to move them keys and face them life sentences and face the RICO Act and face, entrapment and face snitches, then go ahead and do it. You know what I'm saying? That's your option. You know what I'm saying? But, if your mama tells you don't touch a hot stove because the stove got fire on it and you touch the stove and you get burnt, then, you didn't listen to your mama. So therefore, you got to accept the consequences of touching a hot stove. You know what I mean? And, I tell brothers all the time, man, pimping is a bad thing right now. They don't call it pimping no more. They call it human trafficking.
Yeah, human trafficking. I've been hearing that a lot.
So if you get caught up with human trafficking, you're facing a life sentence. So if you want to go out there and you want to take that chance, the same thing, you going out there and you want to be the big man, you want to hold the weight. Well, then if you can deal with the time, then go ahead and do the crime. You know what I'm saying? Because you ain't gonna throw the juices and revenue and say, man, more power to you. But
okay.
you know what I mean? I'm not telling you this to try to, if you really love somebody, man, you don't want to see them go to prison. You don't want to see them fall. So I tell brothers this out of love, man. I ain't trying to tell them because I think, hating on them because I ain't got old or, because, I ain't doing it like I used to do it and, I ain't in this, I'm telling them, man, because listen, man, when we used to be in the game, if we hit our girl in the mouth, the police would come and tell us, man, you and your girlfriend stop fighting. Get somebody in the mouth now, you're going to get domestic violence. You're going to get life in prison almost.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? When we used to ride up and down, we had 5 or 6 women in the car. You having 5 or 6 women in the car, the police get behind you and they think you suspect you for human trafficking, they're going to run an investigation on you. You're going to be facing life in the penitentiary. So why wouldn't I tell these guys to watch their back? Why wouldn't I tell them to look out for the, for the demonstration? Because, it ain't the same. You know what I mean? It's not the same.
Okay.
The women, do their own thing, man. You got to go on the internet, man. You got to look at all those beautiful women on there, man. If all the women have pimps, man, there'd be a bunch of prosperous brothers around here, man. You know what I'm saying? These women, they keeping their own money. They doing their own, and they doing it for cheap. They doing it for $25, $35, $40, $50 special.
Yeah, I hear that all the time.
Yeah, but if they was with a pimp, they wouldn't be doing it wouldn't be no $50 special. It'd be a $500 special.
But see, that's where I say it's another way where it's different because a lot. I won't even say they're peas. You know, they're in the ways. You know, they're claiming that, but they're not really, you know, living out the true lifestyle of what that really entails. So you know, it's kind of like
Because it's over with, Pete.
yeah,
It's over with. Once they close the track, okay, let me tell you something. If you play basketball, right, and all of a sudden I take the basketball and I give you a football, you know, so what you gonna do? You gonna throw a 3-pointer, or you gonna shoot a 3-pointer? You definitely can't bounce a football. So yes, I mean, this is like throwing the game. The game has been, it's been a monkey wrench thrown in the game. You know what I'm saying? The game it's not basketball no more, it's football. You know what I'm saying? I mean, a lot of young cats, man, you know, they prosper. I know a lot of guys that's doing good, you know, with the female. You know what I mean? It ain't stopped. You know what I mean? You know,
yeah. That's what I'm saying. It ain't stopped.
The money ain't stopped, and it ain't gonna stop. It's just the consequences and the penalties just got rougher. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like it's hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard. You know what I mean? You get caught slipping. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you gonna catch your left hook. You know what I'm saying? I mean, a right hook, you gonna be 8 ball in the corner pocket. They gonna bank your ass.